Hello, class. In this lesson, we're going to continue Lesson 16, Contemporary America. With the end of the Cold War, the United States changed its goals and policies. Selected post-Cold War era goals and policies: foreign aid to countries in need, humanitarian aid to people across the world, support for human rights around the world. Note, most of these policies were under Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and President Barack Obama. In fact, Jimmy Carter was the founder of Habitat for Humanity. President George H.W. Bush, 1989 to 1993. Reagan's vice president defeated Democratic candidate Michael Dukakis. George H.W. Bush swore not to raise taxes. He famously said, "Read my lips, America, no new taxes." The fall of communism in Eastern Europe occurred during his presidency. The reunification of East and West Germany. The collapse of Yugoslavia and a five-part civil war. The breakup of the Soviet states and Bosnia. Notably, the Persian Gulf War, 1990 to 1991. The Gulf War was a war waged by the United Nations coalition force led by the United States against Iraq. Iraq invaded Kuwait under Saddam Hussein for oil and petroleum. The Gulf War was the first war in which American women served in a combat role. Operation Desert Storm was the name for the U.S. military response in the Gulf to defend Kuwait. Only one term was served by George H.W. Bush because he was forced to raise taxes due to combat a major deficit created from the Reagan-era tax cuts and the defense spending in connection to Star Wars, or Strategic Defense Initiative. Here we have Commander General William Stormin Norman, my apologies. General Norman Schwarzkopf, also known as Norman Schwarzkopf, on the top left. On the bottom left, we have the American troop movements into Kuwait and also Allied United Nations movements into Kuwait against Iraq. On the top right, we have Yugoslavia, which fought a five-part civil war during this era as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And here we have a female service member during the Persian Gulf War. President William Bill Jefferson Clinton, 1993 to 2001. Governor from Arkansas, he defeated Republican candidate George H.W. Bush, and in his re-election campaign, he defeated Bob Dole. He was a centrist president, which meant he was a moderate. He brokered the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, a trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, which had previously been spearheaded by George H.W. Bush. He pushed for full diplomatic relations with Vietnam, lifted the economic sanctions against South Africa when its government ended the policy of apartheid, which ultimately led to the presidential election in South Africa of Nelson Mandela in 1994. Apartheid was a system of legal racial segregation enforced by the government. He enforced a NATO action in the former Yugoslavia to end civil unrest in Yugoslavia. He was a crusader for American welfare and health care. He was nearly impeached due to perjury over the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and that certainly was not Bill Clinton's only scandal before he was president or while he was president. Here we have the flag for the NAFTA agreement, America, Mexico, and Canada. And on the right, President of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. Changes in the U.S. Supreme Court. The membership of the United States Supreme Court has included women and minorities such as Sandra Day O'Connor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, second female justice and the sixth Jewish justice, Clarence Thomas, second African American after Thurgood Marshall, Sonia Sotomayor, third woman and first Latino, and Elena Kagan, which I didn't list there, who was the fourth woman and the seventh Jewish justice. The civil rights movement in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s provided a model that other groups have used to extend civil rights and promote equal justice. The United States Supreme Court protects the individual rights enumerated or given in the Constitution of the United States. The U.S. Supreme Court identifies a constitutional basis for a right to privacy that is protected from government interference. The U.S. Supreme Court invalidates legislative acts and executive actions that the justices agree exceed the authority granted to government officials by the Constitution of the United States. Here we have a court under William Rehnquist, and we see Rehnquist seated in the center, and Rehnquist's right, or our right, his left, Sandra Day O'Connor. On the top far left, we see Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and above, between Rehnquist and Sandra Day O'Connor, above them is Clarence Thomas. So you can see the court became more diversified in the 1980s and 90s. Immigration in the United States has increased from many diverse countries, especially Asian and Latin American. Reasons for immigration: political freedom, economic opportunity, issues related to immigration policy, strain on government services, filling low-paying jobs in the United States, continued border issues, clear pathways to citizenship, the availability of bilingual education, and increasing cultural diversity. Contributions: music, visual arts, literature, labor, advancements in science, engineering, and other fields. Obviously, we are a country of immigrants. We have been since before this country was founded, and it is wholeheartedly part of our country's DNA. Space race, technology in the late 20th century. Obviously, the space race with the Soviets led to the increased advancement of technology in moving into the turn of the 20th to the 21st century. Space exploration, the shuttle program, the Mars rover, the Voyager missions, the Hubble telescope, communication, satellites, global positioning systems, personal communication devices, notably cell phones, and of course robotics. So on the left, we have the shuttle program. I meant to point out there that is an image of the Mars rover. On the left, we have the shuttle program. On the right, Hubble. And then here below are a group of my former students who were nationally ranked robotics team. Changes in work, school, and healthcare in recent decades. Telecommuting, online coursework, growth of service industries, breakthroughs in medical research, including improved medical diagnostic and imaging technologies, and then, of course, outsourcing and offshoring labor. The reason I use the seal of the University of Phoenix is because they became the pioneers of distance learning and online education in the late 1990s and into the early 2000s. Major events in pop culture from the 1990s. 1990, Hubble telescope launched into space. Lech Walesa becomes the first president of Poland. Nelson Mandela freed, will become the president of South Africa. 1991, collapse of the Soviet Union. Copper Age man found frozen in a glacier. Operation Desert Storm begins. South Africa repeals apartheid laws. 1992, official end of the Cold War. Riots in Los Angeles after the Rodney King verdict. The events between the Weaver family and the FBI at Ruby Ridge, Idaho. 1993, cult compound in Waco, Texas raided, led by David Koresh. Lorena Bobbitt takes brutal revenge on her husband. The use of the internet grows exponentially, and the World Trade Center was bombed for the first time. 1994, the Channel Tunnel opens connecting Britain and France. Nelson Mandela elected president of South Africa. O.J. Simpson arrested for double murder. The Rwandan genocide, and the launch of Internet Explorer by Bill Gates. 1995, Oklahoma City bombing by Timothy McVeigh, killing 168 people in Oklahoma City. 1996, the mad cow disease hits Britain, and Unabomber Ted Kaczynski is arrested. 1997, the Hale-Bopp comet visible, which led to the Heaven's Gate mass suicide. Heaven's Gate was a cult that was connected to the Hale-Bopp comet. Hong Kong returned to China. Pathfinder sends back images of Mars. Princess Diana dies in a car crash after being chased by paparazzi. Scientists clone a sheep in Scotland, Dolly. She lived for 6 years. 1998, India and Pakistan test nuclear weapons. Titanic, most successful movie ever until Avatar and Endgame. U.S. President Bill Clinton impeachment trial. 1999, the euro introduced, the new European Union currency. The fear of the Y2K bug. The killing spree at Columbine High School. And the Panama Canal was returned to Panama. Here we have Bill Gates on the left, the Timothy McVeigh bombing at Oklahoma City on the top right, and the Branch Davidian compound burned in Waco, and that's on the bottom right, and that's David Koresh, leader of the Branch Davidian. President George W. Bush, governor from Texas, defeated Democratic candidates Al Gore and John Kerry, son of President George H.W. Bush. Controversial 2000 election against Al Gore, which was ultimately decided by the Supreme Court. Terrorist attacks on United States soil on September 11, 2001, World Trade Center in New York City, and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Also, a plane went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. That heightened security at home. It obviously led to the Patriot Act, but it also led to the death of thousands of American civilians in New York, Washington, D.C., and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Diplomatic and military initiatives. The war in Afghanistan in response to the terrorist attacks by Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, and the removal of the Taliban regime. The war in Iraq in search of weapons of mass destruction, and the toppling of the regime of Saddam Hussein. The No Child Left Behind education program, and a lack of regulation over the Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC, and lending practices caused a major economic crisis, which ultimately led to TARP, the Troubled Assessment Relief Program, established in 2008. That was the collapse of the American housing market. Top left, the attack on the Pentagon, bottom left, U.S. service members in Afghanistan, and on the right there, the attack by Al-Qaeda on the World Trade Center. President Barack Obama, 2009 to present. His main goal is and was to change the American healthcare system. That is still happening even after his presidency. Elected in 2008 and 12, former senator from Illinois, he defeated Republican candidates John McCain and Mitt Romney. Forced with a major economic crisis that was caused by the collapse of the American housing market and a near collapse of the global banking system, caused by high rates of unemployment, which caused high rates of unemployment, Obama pushed forth the stimulus package, ending the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan, even though we have continued to have a troop presence in both Iraq and Afghanistan, uprisings in North Africa, Egyptian and Libyan conflicts, and the death of Osama bin Laden. Dealing with problems in North Korea, potential missile launch sites and genocide, in Iran, nuclear threats, in Syria, civil war and the rise of ISIS, Russia and Ukraine, control of Crimea. And then NSA leaks were a focal point of concern in connection with Edward Snowden. President Donald J. Trump, 2017 to 2019. He and running mate Mike Pence defeated Hillary Rodham Clinton and Tim Kaine in the 2016 election. This was one of the most tense, mudslinging presidential campaigns in modern political history. Trump's 304 electoral votes to Clinton's 227 carried him to the White House. Clinton won the popular vote by just under 3 million votes. The election result has been swirling with rumors of Russian involvement, Russian hacking and espionage, and U.S. espionage. Notable people attached to the controversy are General Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, and Carter Page, among others. Trump denies any involvement with Russia. Note, the Russian probe was led by Robert Mueller. Trump promised to crack down on immigration, to promise to build a U.S.-Mexican border wall. The funding is very divisive for that. Tax cuts, improvement of veteran affairs, the repeal of Obamacare, the destruction of ISIS, and the improvement of the economy by creating jobs and improving trade deals. In his first days in office, Trump signed an executive order to levy a very controversial travel ban. It has been contested in the courts and was ultimately lifted. He called for an airstrike on a Syrian airfield as a result of nerve gas used by Syria, and he called for the Moab, the largest non-nuclear bomb, or mother of all bombs, to be dropped on Afghanistan. The head of the FBI, James Comey, was fired. This was a rather bizarre political move. The timing couldn't have been worse with a looming FBI investigation. He's had a bit of saber-rattling competition with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in his first 100 days and beyond. Trump and Jong-un have formally met in steps toward North Korea's denuclearization, but that hasn't occurred yet. Trump was able to nominate 2 conservative justices that were narrowly confirmed by the Senate, Justice Neil Gorsuch and Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Longest 33-day government shutdown over the U.S.-Mexico border wall funding, a trade war with China, an impeachment trial and acquittal over obstruction of Congress, and the COVID-19 global pandemic. Here we have the Trump-Pence campaign, and that is a election map of the Electoral College victory for Trump over Clinton. A 2020 timeline. Iranian General Soleimani was killed in a U.S. drone strike on January 2nd. The World Health Organization was notified of the novel coronavirus in China on January 7th. China recorded its first coronavirus death on January 11th. Iran launched ballistic missiles injuring American soldiers in Iraq on January 8th. The impeachment trial for Donald Trump begins on January 16th in connection with the Ukrainian-Russian interference with the presidential election of 2016. Trump is ultimately acquitted on February 5th. The first coronavirus case in the U.S. is reported in Washington State on January 20th. Wuhan, China became the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak and underwent an unprecedented lockdown, impacting 11 million residents on January 23rd. The World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a pandemic on March 11th. Trump declared a national emergency amid the coronavirus pandemic on March 13th. The Dow plunged 2,997 points in its worst drop since 1987 on March 16th. Global coronavirus cases surpassed 1 million on April 2nd. George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota during an arrest for allegedly using a counterfeit bill on May 25th. Black Lives Matter protests take place nationwide for racial justice and an end to police brutality. The removal of Confederate statues and monuments occurred nationwide from June through July. National plans to resume primary, secondary, and higher education in the United States continue. The 2020 U.S. presidential election campaigning has begun, and the election will take place in November of 2020 between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Here we have the COVID-19 virus, and here we have the mural in honor of George Floyd. All right, please let me know if you all have any questions. Thank you so much for your time. Take care.